right, and welcome back to Metflex and Chill. This is your host, Rachel Gregory, and I am here with my amazing friend, Shawn Wells. What's up, Shawn?
Metflex and Chill. What's up? What's up, Rachel?
You're so funny. How are
I'm
you doing?
back by
You're back.
popular demand.
Yes, this is part 2 to an amazing...
Of a 10-part series
yeah, right.
on supplements.
Literally, though,
So
I feel like it's
keep
going to be 10
asking questions.
Parts. Yes. So this is part 2. So part 1, if no one, or if anyone missed part 1, which hopefully you didn't, part 1, we dove into Shawn's top 5 supplements that anybody should have regardless of diet. I think that's what it was. Or that anybody should think about regardless of diet. And we dove deep into those. So that was episode, I'm blanking on the number now, but I will definitely link that in the show notes. So if you missed that one, definitely go back and listen to that one because it was incredible. Shawn also brought us through his entire story, his background, all of that. So that is in the first episode. But Shawn, do you want to give us like a quick, in case anybody is listening to this episode first, just a quick few minutes of who you are. You don't have to give your whole story since that was in the previous episode. We want people to go back and listen to that, so you should. But just tell us who you are and what you do for a living.
I'm just a guy who bought a few supplements and then felt empowered enough to do a podcast. So, no, that's not it. That's not it. I am a nutritional biochemist. I've been a formulator for about 20 years. I've formulated over 500 products for about 10 years. I worked as a chief clinical dietitian. I am a certified sports nutritionist and a fellow in the International Society of Sports Nutrition. And I don't know, I'm known as the ingredientologist now. You can check me out on Instagram and ShawnWells.com. I've got a bunch of cool guides that are free on all these different supplements, on keto, on paleo, on fasting. And I've been doing keto for about 20 years, and I'm known for that as well, which is how we met.
Yes. And aren't you also known as the world's greatest formulator? Isn't that a title?
I am.
Maybe?
I am. That is a title I was given. It is intense.
Pretty intense.
You're the world's greatest keto girl.
We just talked about this in Metflex.
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 Okay. Everything's changing.
I know. It's all right.
No, it's cool. I'm all about metabolic flexibility. I really am.
Yeah.
That can be another episode. We dive into that because I do targeted cyclical. I do all that good stuff, and I love it.
Okay, that's part 3.
And I want to dive into mitochondrial health, and I want to do like a whole one on like resilience and immunity.
Okay,
so
I'm down.
We got many part series coming up.
Yes. So, well, let's dive into what today's episode is about.
Yes.
And we are diving into all things protein. So
yes.
I'm about to grill you on all things protein, specifically as they relate to supplements, protein powders, BCAAs, EAAs, things like that. Because I get questions about this all the time. There's so much confusion out there. There's just so much out there. So you are the world's greatest formulator. You're the world's greatest badass guy. And I'm just like rambling stuff off now. But you are badass.
Thank you. You are too.
Thanks. So let's dive into protein. And the first thing I want to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit about, well, this is a really loaded question, so just kind of take it however you want.
Okay.
Can you just kind of dive into the importance of protein in general, and as specifically as we age, does protein become more important, or does it not matter?
Those are great questions. Those aren't just dumb questions to ask. I mean, people assume protein is good. We need more protein. And I will say, like, if you do look at like in the past, carbs have obviously been the greatest thing ever and villainized, and fat has been the greatest thing ever and villainized. Protein through the years is like the macronutrient that's like untouchable. It's really bulletproof if you look at it. And that's why, like, actually almost every protein company there's ever been, including one I used to work for, Dymatize, got acquired, because it's just a safe, stable business and people will always want protein. You know, babies need more protein for growth. Teenagers, young people need it for growth. Like, you know, your kid's playing on the football team, if your girl's on the, you know, gymnastics or whatever. It's like, and then as we age, to your point, we need more protein. Like, if you're someone who's into fitness and want to recover faster or build more muscle or whatever, you need more protein. And then therapeutically, I used to work in hospitals and nursing homes. And, you know, if you get someone with pressure ulcers and wounds that happen with kind of not being turned enough, and some of the situations that happen with dementia or people that are bedbound, it's a very real problem. They need more protein. People that have urinary tract infections need more protein, et cetera. So it's all about nitrogen retention. And then there's also which protein contains nitrogen. And you need the right amount of nitrogen to stay what would be anabolic, which means kind of on the plus side of building muscle. Obviously, we're constantly going through phases of anabolic and catabolic, which is healthy and good. As muscle, like all tissues, like they break down and build back up, they reshape themselves, and our body is in constant dynamic flux. And that's a good thing. Like, our bones are constantly rebuilding themselves. Our gut is like constantly breaking down and building back up. And that's a healthy thing. And with positive stimulus, like resistance training, it will create hypertrophy, meaning growth of the muscle, as long as there's enough nutrition there to support that, meaning these building blocks, the amino acids that are going to create that skeletal muscle or whatever the protein's going to. And a key one in that is leucine, which is the driver of muscle protein synthesis. But kind of going back to that nitrogen retention idea, a lot of people forget the catabolic side of the equation. So like net muscle accretion, which would mean like how much muscle you are collectively building up, is not just about muscle protein synthesis. It's also about muscle protein breakdown and the ratio thereof. So how much are you breaking down and how much are you building up, and what's that look like together? And so hopefully the net is positive. And to your point, as we age, it becomes very common to have sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle as we age. And one of the most dramatic factors in healthy aging that you can look at is muscle, overall lean body mass, including muscle, but also muscle strength. Like a grip test is actually like one of the best determinants of healthy aging, like how well you're going to age and how long you're going to live, longevity, literally grip test. So, you know, strength is important. Holding on to muscle is important, and having the right amount of protein and the right timing of protein is important. We also see with sarcopenia, there's a phenomenon of trading off tissues to where you get something called sarcopenic obesity. So let's say as you age, maybe your weight isn't changing, but your body composition is. So you're trading muscle for fat. And one of the reasons this happens is we become more insulin resistant over time, and muscle protein synthesis doesn't happen as easily. So when you look at plasma, like basically your blood, and how quickly, it's not about like how much leucine you get per se or how much protein you get per se. Part of it is the kinetics of it, like how quickly something peaks in the plasma and your body senses it and turns on muscle protein synthesis. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, with insulin resistance and not being able to turn that corner as fast with these amino acids, then you're seeing it takes more and more and more protein as we age. Pair this with, as we age, we tend to eat less protein, especially in large boluses, like you'd need to turn on muscle protein synthesis. So it's a double whammy of us rarely eating larger protein-based meals as we age, us not eating protein with enough frequency as we age, us being more insulin resistant as we age, and then definitely not getting the quality of protein that might be high in leucine. Mm-hmm. So all those things paired up, as we age, we tend to never optimize muscle protein synthesis and therefore start trading muscle for fat in this sarcopenic obesity situation. And that's what you see is like people, and then muscle's important also for maintaining bone mass. Mm-hmm. Because your bones actually become more dense from literally carrying the weight of the muscle. Mm-hmm. And they're dynamic tissues. Again, there's crosstalk between muscle and fat. There's crosstalk between bone and muscle, etc. Like these are actually like there's constant discussions almost happening between these tissues. It's really fascinating. But that would be my answer, is that it's certainly critical, but that's one of the biggest factors right now, is that we're not eating the right quality protein. We're not eating large enough amounts bolus wise where we have optimized muscle protein synthesis that's high enough in leucine. Mm-hmm. We need to look at, as we age, we also go down in anabolic hormones like testosterone. So I could probably quickly fix this insulin resistance / leucine resistance is a term by giving someone an anabolic, hormone replacement therapy. Like if it's a male, like, testosterone replacement therapy, and then something like metformin or berberine or dihydroberberine, that's a glucose disposal agent that optimizes blood sugar. And you could probably put that person back to where they were in their 20s when they were able to optimize muscle protein synthesis.
Interesting. What about if they just ate more protein and quality protein?
That is a way to do it for sure. But the problem is, like, I think, when you look at, these some of these are my theories, and it's literally extrapolating a lot of data and putting it together. But if Dr. Gabe Wilson, Jacob's brother, him and I worked on this presentation once and put a lot of these ideas together for the ISSN. And it really was around this whole idea of insulin resistance and leucine resistance. And when your testosterone is through the roof and your insulin sensitivity is through the roof, like when you're growing, mm-hmm. Think about how anabolic you are when you're growing. And it's because those two things are through the roof. And when those things are through the floor, it gets really hard. And then when you add to it, like other catabolic scenarios, like mm-hmm. having cancer, like having a wound, like having burns, like having an injury, like a fractured hip, or things like this, or like a virus, then that need goes way up, So it stacks, like, and maybe it's like, instead of like when you're growing, maybe you only need 1 gram of leucine. And again, it's not really about total amount, but let's say it's 1 gram of leucine, but like in your 20s, you need 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine to optimize muscle protein synthesis. But maybe when you're insulin resistant and 50, 60, 70, maybe it's 5 grams. And then when you're fracturing your hip or you have a pressure ulcer or whatever, it becomes 6, 7, 8 grams of leucine, and you just can't bridge that gap. Like, it gets difficult. So that's when I would actually say the smarter thing to do would either be to, use glucose disposal agents, which I'm a big fan of, as you know, berberine, etc.
We talked about that in the last episode.
Yep. To do hormone replacement therapy, which may include something like GH and testosterone, but also to look at supplementing your meals potentially with leucine, HMB, KIC, HICA, some of these leucine and leucine metabolites, to help with this muscle protein synthesis, muscle protein breakdown scenario.
Gotcha. Okay. Can we backtrack really quickly, just in case anybody listening doesn't, because you've said leucine several times, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands what that is. So protein is made up of amino acids, right? So can you just give us like a quick lesson on amino acids, essential versus non-essential, and where leucine falls into that? Just so everybody listening, I want to make sure they all understand what leucine is, why it's an essential amino acid, and the difference between essential and non-essential, and where we get those from.
Yeah. With essential amino acids, it's depending on who you ask, it's about 9 of the 20 or so amino acids. And then there's conditionally essential and non-essential amino acids. Like the non-essential we can synthesize conditionally, depends on kind of what I was talking about before, like how impaired you are. And then like some of the conditionally essential amino acids like arginine or something like may come into play when, again, like maybe you're injured or have a virus or whatever. But the essential ones are essential for you to get in your diet. You cannot make them under any circumstances. And probably some of the most key ones for skeletal muscle would be the branch chain amino acids, the 3 amino acids that are all in those essential amino acids. So that would be leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And they make up about 70% of skeletal muscle. So a large portion of skeletal muscle. And when you catabolize skeletal muscle and exercise, you're actually using that for fuel. But the most key one of those that we're talking about is leucine. And that is the amino acid that is the signal. It literally sends out the signal to the body that we need to turn on muscle protein synthesis. We need to go into anabolic mode. And most people think that that protein synthesis is muscle, but there are all the tissues are, like I said, constantly in flux. So that's where, yes, muscle protein synthesis is all about leucine and skeletal muscle and all that, but your whole body is made up of protein. So, yes.
So with leucine, so basically there's something called the leucine threshold, right? And so that is this threshold. If you just think that, I kind of just always describe it as, like you said, it's a light switch, right? So when you get above this threshold, this leucine threshold, you're basically turning on muscle protein, I can never say the word, muscle protein synthesis. And you need a certain amount of leucine to be able to do that. And like you said, it varies. And as you get older, you might need more. So if someone listening to this, kind of like, if we're thinking practical sense and if we're talking like, food, and we're going to get into protein powders, and I want to talk about EAs and first BCAAs and all that in a second. But if we're talking about food, right? And like, if someone's listening to this, like, all right, well, now I know what leucine is, and now I know I need more leucine, but where do I get it, and how much is enough? So if you could kind of give a practical, like, okay, if someone's like, all right, I want to get a good amount of leucine or a good bolus of leucine in a meal, what do I eat? What would you say?
Well, that's where whey, always being champ, right? Like, there's a good reason for that. Whey is largely made up of, is higher, I should say, in BCAAs and leucine than almost any other protein source.
Whey protein. Okay. So
Whey
first,
protein.
before we get into the protein source itself, but let's start with just like food. So like, okay, I guess like what foods have the most whey, or what foods have the most leucine, that is the most bioavailable, I guess I'm trying to get at, for your body to absorb and use.
Yeah, most of the animal protein sources of skeletal muscle are going to be high in essential amino acids, BCAAs, and leucine. So things like beef and chicken and things like that. And then whey is a component of milk, along with the slow protein casein. So those are, milk is a good source. And then eggs obviously are an incredible source of protein.
Okay, so why don't we dive into the protein powders, the different types, because this is something that a lot of people get confused about too. It's like there's just so many different types out there. So can we start with let's start with whey, and then I want to kind of compare it to casein as well, and then dive into collagen and beef protein and plant-based proteins. Like soy, hemp, pea protein, things like that. But starting with whey, in terms of, like, if we're talking about whey protein powder, right? There's different types, like whey isolate and whey concentrate. You'll see those two are like the main types, right? Usually if we're looking at like different protein powders. What are the differences between those, and what would your recommendation be in terms of if someone is looking for, looking to supplement with a whey protein powder? What would you say, look for this and avoid this?
Right. So there's hydrolyzed, there's concentrate, there's isolate. So let's go through those. So concentrate is concentrated whey, but it still has some lactose, the milk carbohydrate, the milk sugar, and it still has a little bit of milk fat. It's less processed. So isolate is isolated further to where it essentially is processed further through ion exchange or cross-flow microfiltration. These are two processes to process them further to get rid of that small amount of lactose and milk fat further to where it's essentially largely just the milk protein. The whey protein specifically. So that's great. There's kind of pros and cons of each to me. The pro is maybe if you have trouble with digesting lactose, you want a whey protein isolate. But I think I actually lean more towards whey protein concentrate, and it's cheaper. But if you're getting grass-fed, cold filtered, it's less processed. So there's a number of growth factors that are present in milk of all species. These, things that are most certainly concentrated in colostrum when a newborn of any species is born. There's concentrated immunoglobulins and growth factors and all these things to support life, and so that they don't get sick. And those growth factors are still present to some degree in milk. But when you expose it to high heat, when you process it down, like you lose some of those growth factors. So it's like there's more protein in whey protein isolate. There isn't the lactose. That's a pro. The whey protein concentrate is less processed, is a little bit cheaper. Those are pros. So it's kind of a trade-off. It just depends what you feel like works best for you. I'd say experiment with it. And then there's hydrolyzed, but that term gets thrown around a lot, and it's literally like digesting the protein, pre-digesting it. So it supposedly gets absorbed easier, but it's only done like about 1 to 15% of the protein is hydrolyzed. You can literally just barely hydrolyze it and say it's hydrolyzed, and that's very low cost. And I'm very aware of all the kind of loopholes with all this stuff. And then 15% is typically the limit, because once you start getting beyond that, it starts actually getting really bitter. There's some enzymes that you can add that digest protein, like proteases. Like, I'm trying to think, there's a company, Deerland Enzymes, that makes a protease that's really good for proteins. But if you let it sit like for 30 minutes and you come back to it, if you have that enzyme in it, it'll taste super bitter. And whether, again, that's good or not, I don't know. Like, the fact that it's pre-digested means that you're going to spike probably that leucine level better. Okay. But if it's highly digested and you're getting down to di and tripeptides, that's cool for being anabolic, quote unquote, but it might have more of an insulin impact, and you might be losing. We're finding like some of these like 8 amino acid peptides like have an effect on blood pressure. That, for example, growth hormone is 20 amino acids long. Like, we don't know, like, there's so many things that happen biologically that we do with milk or that are present in milk to sustain life and growth, that we don't know, like, all of these, we're just discovering like some tripeptides, like, for example, a tripeptide would be like glutathione, which is the master antioxidant. Carnosine is a dipeptide. That's an important buffer. Like, there's creatine is essentially a tripeptide. Like, it's just, we don't know. Like, so like I'm telling you, like, it's an exploration. And sometimes what I think, like, we wanted to just get down to like the purest protein, the fastest protein. That's cool for, like, supposedly bang for your buck and maximal protein and that leucine spike, but we may be losing some things in the process that are inherent to growth and life that, like, the creator gave us, that, like, we're getting rid of. So I don't have all the answers because we don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I guess a question came up, or a thought that I had, in terms of whey. You probably heard a lot of people, and I've experienced this myself with certain whey proteins. Can you tell me why not a lot, but some people have issues with bloating when they consume whey? Is that, mostly just due to the quality of the whey source, or where it's coming from, or?
It could be several things. I think if you're having like hormone and antibiotic treated grain-fed cattle, then they can actually have like growth hormone present, and that can lead to some degree of insulin resistance, and other like gut health issues, leaky gut type issues. Like, obviously everyone thinks it's the lactose. It's not always that. Like, there's so much more complex. Sometimes people have issues with dairy, and there's alpha lactalbumin, beta lactalbumin that people can have issues with. the casomorphins that are present in casein and milk protein can cause they're linked to autism and certain like gut issues. So it's just one of those things that I would say, like, for example, there's a new milk, A2 milk, that I always thought I was just lactose intolerant. And I had this A2 milk, which removes the casomorphins. And
which is just the casein part?
No, it's not. It gets so much more complex than that. But
we don't have to dive into too deep.
But I ended up not having any gas or bloating from it. And normally I have to use like the lactose-free milk. So this A2 milk is very interesting.
And what is just research. So listeners, like, what exactly is the difference between A1 and A2 milk? Is that that is a deep dive. All right. Well, there's so much more I want to. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, we can just Google it. Okay. Maybe we'll come back to that in part 11. So that was whey. So I want to talk a little bit about casein, because I feel like casein is not as popular as whey in terms of if we're looking at like protein powders and things like that. And you do hear, whey, I mean, the general kind of rule, I don't want to call them rules, but general, like what people talk about, you take whey, to get that quick leucine kick or just that quick absorption because it absorbs very quickly, versus casein is, a lot of people think, take that, before you go to bed or something because it's a slower digesting protein. So can you tell us a little bit about casein and what the difference between whey and why you would maybe take casein over whey, or like pros and cons?
Historically, the theory is that whey is higher in leucine and BCAAs. Whey is a faster protein.
Faster digesting.
But some of the data, it's faster digesting. But some of the data is actually pretty compelling on either the combination, like a milk protein isolate, or just using the casein, like especially one that's semi-hydrolyzed. It's actually not clear because, again, milk is just it's the thing that literally grows us, all of us. So it's like sometimes it's counterintuitive, I think, because there's so many other factors going on in milk that I don't have all the answers. But you would traditionally think that casein is going to be inferior to whey protein, and I would say to some degree it is, but it's not by as much as you'd think. It's actually pretty close.
Is that because it has less of the BCAAs, or in terms of the amino acid profile?
Yes.
Or no? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's more it than actually being slow digesting. Now, there's types of casein you can get that are slower digesting, that it's like the casein in the micelle, micellar casein, and it's a little bit slower digesting. And so kind of differentiating whey protein isolate and whey protein concentrate. There's kind of a whey protein or a caseinate, or a micellar casein. So micellar casein would be slower and supposedly isolates faster. So but one solution can just be you get milk protein isolate, and you're getting both whey and casein, and you're kind of getting the benefits of both. But ideally, the theory is post-workout, take your whey protein, and at night, take your slow protein like casein. So it has slow release. That's the theory.
Bro science.
Yeah, the bro science.
Okay, well, while we're on this real quick, before we dive into collagen, I do want to talk real quick about the anabolic window. And post-workout, I feel like it's been kind of debunked over the years, and people are starting to understand it more, that, overall protein intake throughout the day is probably more important than chugging down a whey protein shake right after your workout, because the anabolic window is going to go away in 20 seconds. So can you talk a little bit about what the anabolic window is?
I used to freak out about this. Literally the second I stopped my workout, I was in panic mode for protein.
Can you
And
tell us what the anabolic window is and what that
So
is?
it's supposedly there's this period of time that you're primed, your muscles are primed, and going back to like what I was discussing before with insulin resistance and leucine resistance, this actually does sync up with that idea that like during exercise, your GLUT4 receptors are upregulated that would take in glucose, similar to like this idea of the glucose disposal agent like berberine. So that's why it's one great reason that you might want to take a postprandial stroll, is that like after your walk, or after your meal, that's the prandial, that you exercise a little bit, and just even walking can upregulate those GLUT4 receptors, and then you're taking in more blood glucose, you're less insulin resistant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a great time to walk, is right after your meal. But the idea is that after intense training, that I think one, your GLUT4 is upregulated, but two, this muscle is damaged and sending out signals to be repaired. So the idea is that not only would you optimize muscle protein synthesis and use leucine more efficiently, but you would also proactively be sending protein to this tissue that's in dire need, supposedly. Mm-hmm. But we don't know like how long, how realistic is that throughout evolution, that we would have like down protein like the second we were done with some intense bout of, I don't know, chasing a saber-tooth like tiger or something. Like, it's not very realistic. So maybe like we don't know, just like with like taking antioxidants around a workout might be counterproductive, or anti-inflammatories around a workout might be counterproductive, because your body, with that oxidation, with that inflammation, is sending out signals, we need repair, we need repair. So maybe to some degree, for some of the reasons I'm saying, you are more primed to use that protein. Mm-hmm. But also you may be interfering with some of these signals that over many hours could be saying, we need help at this muscle, like, so I think that's where like some of the equivocal nature of this comes in. But also, if you're someone that's eating a ton of protein, that's when the anabolic window becomes almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
And that's what they've found. It's more the 24-hour window. But if you're someone that is working out intensely and you're not getting enough protein, like let's say you're dieting, cutting, whatever, or you're just eating a low protein diet, then, or if you're sarcopenic and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then maybe it does become more relevant. I don't know about like the first, minute you finish your workout, but like within that couple hours window, it might be more relevant. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I think they've found. And I think I also think like elite athletes, you'd think that they need more, but I think they have more compensatory things going on that make them elite athletes, that they've actually adjusted. Mm-hmm. That like they have like the athletic gene, and they recover faster, and they have more muscle carnosine and more creatine phosphate, and they just stay anabolic and anti-catabolic and recover faster, easier with less, because they're also highly insulin sensitive, because they're getting enough protein, because they're just on and on and on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then also, like, if we're talking about if you're doing for example, like a fasted workout or something, like if you're having, a lot of people don't realize how like digestion doesn't just happen right away, right? So if you consume a pre-workout meal that has a ton of protein in it, then potentially probably don't need to be chugging down a protein shake or anything right after, even if your goal is to build as much muscle as possible, whatever it is, versus if you were going into that workout and maybe you haven't had protein for like 3 to 4 hours, and you probably need to have a little bit more protein closer to the end of that workout. Does that make sense, or do you agree with that, like in terms of just the timing of it?
Yeah, 100%. Like,
Okay.
if you were to listen to like some of the sports nutrition companies, and you'd be taking like whey protein isolates and pre-workout, and then you'd be taking BCAAs intra-workout, and then you're using whey protein or a blend of proteins post-workout, and then you're using casein at night, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It gets you to use a lot of products.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they've shown that just chocolate milk for athletes like post-workout worked very well. Because I think of the insulin spike, and again, that it has casein and whey in it.
Can we talk really quickly before we get into collagen about that insulin spike? The GLUT4 transporter. So like right after you have an intense workout, you hear all the time, like people talk about your muscles are more primed to absorb, or deal with carbohydrates. So doing like a targeted ketogenic diet, targeted approach, or consuming carbohydrates post workout. Can you talk a little bit about why that happens? Like why it might be beneficial
insulin,
to consume carbs post workout?
Yeah. That insulin spike does drive amino acids into the muscle, like faster. I mean, so there is some degree of synergy with protein plus carbohydrate. And performance is enhanced with some degree of carbohydrate as well. Like they've shown that like it's not much. Like pre-workout, they've shown that it's only like 17 grams of a fast carbohydrate. So it's not much. And there's actually studies that show carbohydrate switching, like Gatorade, and like your body, like you're tricking your body into thinking you're consuming sugar because it's tasting sweet. This is actually one of the things that I think happens with diet sodas and all that. And that's a whole other discussion, but is that your body's tasting sweet, and then like changing some things that are happening biologically. So literally the swishing thing is really interesting. You can just spit
I'm
it
smiling
right
because I talked about that on like a few episodes ago. I was talking about a question about, I think I just did a dive into like targeted keto and talked about the carb swish and stuff like that. But
sorry, so post-workout, the idea is that you do get some carbohydrate, that you do spike insulin, but there are insulin mimetic type compounds or amino acids that are present, like especially like the pure protein you get, and especially if it's whey, like isoleucine, for example, and alanine, and some of these certain amino acids can have an impact on blood glucose or insulin. So that's an interesting thing. Like they show that like a fast, like whey that you do chug does kind of have an insulin effect. So you may not need the carbohydrate as much. It depends on how much you've worked out, and how insulin resistant you are, how effectively you deal with carbohydrates, and all that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. All right, cool. So we did whey, casein. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about collagen, since it's become very popular in the last, I guess, 2 years or so, collagen powder and peptides and things like that. So there is kind of this, or what I've noticed over the last few years is that some people are like, okay, I can just replace my whey with collagen. In terms of like if I'm consuming collagen powder, right? And so can you tell us why you can't do that, or why you're not getting the same amino acid profiles in collagen versus whey and that whole deal?
Yeah, so I love collagen. I take 20 to 40 grams every day. I believe in it deeply. A third of your body is collagen. Cola actually means the derivative of it means like glue. It's the connective tissue essentially for all of your body. It makes up your bone, your gut, your skin, your joints, your tendons, ligaments. Like, it's so critical. And certainly I think most people are not getting enough collagen in, because as carnivores, we would have been consuming the animal, and now we're just pretty much consuming the skeletal muscle, which is great for maintaining our skeletal muscle, but it's not great for maintaining the rest of our body. So we're not eating the skin of the animal. We're not eating the hair, the gut, the joints, the ligaments, the tendons, the, whatever, the bone, all the other stuff of the animal. And so we're missing out on the collagen. So I think it's incredibly critical, like as we age, to get collagen protein. So getting that out of the way, I'm a huge fan of collagen, but its biological value in terms of those essential amino acids is a 7, whereas an egg is 100, and whey protein is actually like 115 or something like that. So literally it has very little impact on skeletal muscle mass.
And that's just because
it essentially,
it has less essential.
It has almost no essential amino acids, including leucine. Leucine levels incredibly low. It's high in lysine, proline, hydroxyproline, these things that are really important amino acids for all that connective tissue that I was discussing.
Yeah.
So one of the best things that you could do, in my estimation, if you want to be truly anabolic and age well, is get, a good mix of these proteins, either by eating that kind of carnivorous, nose to tail diet, or having, a good like whey, casein, milk protein, and collagen. And then you can truly be anabolic to the connective tissue that surrounds and supports that muscle.
Yeah, I agree. And if we're talking about also like getting collagen and all these amino acids just from food, we can definitely get them from food. We're not saying that you have to necessarily supplement, but I think also something that I want to talk about with collagen is like obviously there's a lot of collagen in bone broth, right? Like, so bone broth is really big, but we're not talking about the bone broth or the broth that you get from your grocery store, right?
I was just going to say, it depends on the source of the bone broth. Like, you have to have, if it's like watery, just pure water, then there's not much protein in there. Like, when you actually...
It should be like bones, jelly. Yes, it should be jelly.
When you put bones in a broth and you let it sit for hours and hours and hours, and that marrow is breaking down and all that stuff, like, I don't know if you've ever had like the, scooped out the, the bone marrow, like, it is. And like sometimes people put the butter on it, bake it in and the whole thing, and it's really good. But you're right. It's like a jelly kind of consistency. So your homemade bone broth is going to be like a little thicker. And if you've ever had like a collagen bar or collagen drink or something, it's kind of that thicker, gelatinous kind of thing like you're talking about as well.
Yeah. And like probably 95, if not 100%. I mean, maybe not as much anymore maybe not as much, because there are some companies that are making quote unquote real bone broth. But if you go in a grocery store and you go to like the broth aisle or chicken stock or whatever, literally most all of those are just water that are flavored with flavorings, and they call it broth. And there's like pretty much like nothing in, like there's nothing in there that's beneficial.
Agreed. So you should look at the protein content in the nutrition facts panel for that broth, and then you can tell like what the protein level would be coming from collagen. So,
yeah, for sure. So so with that being said, like with someone who is who may have replaced their, maybe they were having whey protein powder and now they're having collagen, they probably shouldn't be, especially if the goal is to build muscle, right? You want to make sure you're getting a good balance of both of those. So that's kind of the point I wanted to get across, is like you can't replace whey protein powder with collagen protein powder because there's not the same amino acid profile, which a lot of people don't know because one, a lot of labels don't put the amino acid profile on there. And I want to talk a little bit about as we get into beef protein, because this is something that's becoming a little bit more popular. I think beef protein, and it's kind of marketed. I mean, I guess it depends where it's coming from, but it's marketed as, if you're sensitive to whey, you can just take beef protein. But with that being said, can we talk a little bit about beef protein and what the typical amino acid profile of beef protein would be? Is it more, collagen type, or is it more like, it just depends on where the source is?
No, not really. Like, I mean, the thing that I would look at now, just being a consciously healthy kind of primally paleo, organic driven, nutrition driven person is like to your point that it's, and someone who's like eco-conscious is that like, how are these animals treated? Were they grass-fed, grass-finished, free range, treated well, like, and not with antibiotics and hormones and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because all those things become a factor. And, are the grains that they're eating like covered with glyphosate and on and on and on. So be conscious of that. But essentially beef protein, just like egg protein or chicken protein, they're all anabolic. They're all really high in EAAs and leucine. Okay. Certainly this one protein source that's meant to grow an animal like a cow in a short period of time is probably the most anabolic head to head, but to your body, like there's not a massive difference. I think beef is nearly as anabolic.
Okay. Because I've kind of come across and dove into a bunch of different protein powders just out of curiosity. I make a lot of protein ice cream. I don't know if you've seen, I always post about it, but it's like my dessert pretty much every night. But I talk about like when I'm looking at my overall day, like at least 80 to 90% of my day is made up of protein from real whole foods. And then I allow like that 10 to 15% to be more processed, which just comes down to protein powder, just because I like making ice cream, protein ice cream. The recipe is on my website. If anybody's listening and curious, just look up, I'll link it in the show notes. But anyway, I've dove into beef protein, and there's some people who are, or some companies that they don't disclose like their amino acid profile makeup. So there's a few companies that I've like reached out to. I'm like, can you send me your amino acid profile for your protein? Sends it, and there's like very little leucine.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. No, I didn't even think this nefariously, but you're right. Wow. So there are loopholes like that, and it's been a while since I've seen stuff like that, but you're right that absolutely, if they just say beef protein, that it can be from the hide or the bones or the hooves or whatever, and essentially be mostly collagen, but beef sourced.
Yeah.
But that would be very disreputable. Like per the FDA, I think that's very disingenuous at the very least. I think you could have a fair legal case against that, but a lot of companies do that. And I remember at Dymatize, we were testing out companies that were saying beef protein, and it was essentially collagen, to your point. Beef protein would taste somewhat, you should know the difference. Like it would be like somewhat,
beefy tasting,
like essentially metallic, like that like muscle tasting. Like, I mean, you can process it certain ways, but it's still going to taste like a chocolatey hamburger. Like if it's just a super clean taste, then probably chances are it is collagen. That would be very disingenuous. Collagen that's sourced from a cow. And you can get collagen from fish, chicken, beef, like obviously, I mean, any animal source. So,
So I think the biggest kind of takeaway with, I want to get into plant proteins, but the biggest takeaway of kind of all of these, and we can talk about this plant protein powders too, is like if you're looking for a protein powder and you are looking to, if you're someone who is interested in building muscle, right, and all that, whatever, you want to look at that amino acid profile, or at least if you are, you're, what's the word? Now I'm blanking. You're hesitant of the protein powder, right? And you're like, I don't know if this is what I'm looking for. Getting kind of that amino acid profile and looking at the leucine content of that is probably your best bet, just to be, conscious of that, right? Like, is that something that you would say?
It is something I would say. I do love it has to be typical amino acid profile. And if it's not provided on the packaging, then you have every right to ask the company for it, and they should provide it. They're always, by law, supposed to give you the testing results for whatever product you want to see. And that should include the typical amino acid profile. So, yes.
Sorry. Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, and with that, if you were, say, looking for the leucine content for like a scoop of protein powder, what would your ideal grams of leucine be in that? What would you want it to be if you did have that, access to it?
Yeah, I would say
like per serving.
It's like around 2.5.
2.5 grams
is pretty good. Yeah. So, and whey protein for 25 grams has about 2.8 grams of leucine.
And that's enough to get you to turn that light switch on, basically. That get above that threshold.
And truly optimize it. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. So, and what we found, going right into plant proteins, is that like there's studies with wheat protein, soy protein, where they're looked at head to head with things like whey protein, and they perform dramatically inferiorly. Like just garbage almost.
Because there's no leucine.
Because there's no leucine. It's actually not so much a problem of providing that full amino acid profile. To some degree, that could be an issue if you're like, let's say, a vegan and you're not eating enough complementary proteins. But what it comes down to is total protein for nitrogen retention. If you're not doing enough complementary proteins, it could be EAAs, but more than likely, it's mostly just leucine and optimizing muscle protein synthesis. And there's studies that have shown this, that like the wheat protein was, again, like you had to literally take, instead of the 25 grams of whey protein, you had to take 50 grams because you needed twice as much leucine. Now, that same study showed that if you added in the difference in leucine, like I forget, it's something like 1 to 1.5 grams of leucine. If you added in that difference of leucine to the 25 grams of wheat or soy protein, that it's actually fairly equivalent in performance for muscle protein synthesis to the whey. So it's for muscle protein synthesis, if that's your lens, then leucine content is going to be the key. Obviously with protein, I went into before, there's a million other factors, growth factors, immunoglobulins, different size peptides, the kinetics of the peptides, like what their biological effects, like there's so many other things. But for muscle, that would be the most important factor, is the leucine and then the total protein delivered to support that muscle protein synthesis that's turned on.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Cool. Okay, so let's do you have time? We're getting a little long, but do you have
whatever you need, Rachel, whatever you need.
I just love your knowledge. I just want to ask you a million questions.
Okay. Well, actually, speaking of this, I did write a large part of the ISSN's position stand. At one point, it was like, I think the most downloaded article, like on in terms of scientific journal articles of the year. And it came out last year, and it was the protein position stand of the ISSN. It's a very thorough piece. There's about 30 different authors on it. I did a ton of work on it. So that's something to check out. And it's free. It's open. So like you can actually read the whole thing for free.
Okay.
So it's pretty cool.
So if you're listening and you're a geek like us, I will link that in the show notes.
Yes.
So you can check it out. Okay, so let's talk about plant protein, and there's different types of plant protein, specifically soy, hemp, pea. Those are the kind of 3 top ones, I guess. Mm-hmm. Soy, hemp, and pea protein. Can you kind of maybe from...
I would say rice is probably
rice protein, yeah. Tell us a little bit about like the differences between those, maybe like pros and cons. What if someone was a vegetarian or vegan and they had to choose the most optimal source of like that type of protein, and they were looking to build muscle, and we're talking muscle protein synthesis, optimization, things like that. What would be like from top to bottom your choices with that in terms of sources?
It's actually going to come down more to like I've literally tried flavoring all these things, and that's more like to where I would get to like the most important protein is the protein you are compliant with. Are you going to use that product, or is it going to sit on your shelf and you talk about it's got all these benefits but you never take it because it tastes gross? Yeah. Like, so that's a massive factor. And that's one reason why whey is also super popular, or milk protein or casein. They have that dairy taste and you get that milkshake flavor, and it's easy to add a little sweet or a lot of different flavors to it. And it makes sense to our brain. Like we like milkshakes and things like that. So with plant proteins, a lot of them are gritty or have a green color that's not appetizing. Some of them have like an earthy taste. So getting one that's like what they call like processed to like a silk level, like rice protein or pea protein, like they've got them like really dialed now, like to where one, it's an isolate, like over 90% protein, but 2, it's also like not gritty. It's what they would call silk. Like, so its mouthfeel is not odd, like to where like that's the huge difference with plant proteins and why it's difficult to try and make them taste like whey, like that creaminess that you get. Like I've worked on a lot of plant proteins, and I had to work specifically on that kind of neutral taste, that non-grittiness. Then I would, if I could, I'd add like a non-dairy like creamer, like an MCT, like plated on like a pea protein or something like that. And then I'd also add in some gums, some fibers, like to kind of like round it out and smooth it out. So it did have like a little bit more body, a little bit more creaminess. And then you're kind of getting more towards a whey where people don't notice as much, but like plant proteins early on were gross. Luckily, like soy is not good. Hemp is very gritty and has a very pronounced taste. So I would say like pea protein is probably the most neutral. And rice is maybe second. So those are some ones to look at.
So the only kind of plant protein I've ever had and I consume, or not I've ever had, that I've ever enjoyed the taste of, is Organifi. Have you ever had that?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're chocolate and vanilla, and it's very, from what I know, it's a super high quality, and it's very expensive, but because of the quality, and it also has other stuff in it. It's not just like, I think it's actually a combination of pea, hemp, and then a bunch of digestive enzymes and some other things. That's the one that I use to make protein ice cream. Well, besides whey and some other ones, but I think that one is mainly hemp and pea. But in terms of like, if we're getting away from like the taste of things, in terms of like the bioavailability benefits, is there differences between say pea protein, hemp protein, and like kind of the incomplete versus complete proteins?
Yeah, not so much. Like there are some studies that do show that some digestive enzymes, these proteases, and then maybe cellulases, and things like that, that could uh, help break down some of the non-digestible components, um, can help with that uptake, and then that serum spike of amino acids, and other things that help with gut health seem to have a similar impact on proteins in general, but probably more importantly is kind of the inferior proteins, the plant proteins. So like things like glutamine, things like probiotics, like have all shown positive benefits on that amino acid uptake. So if I was to do a plant protein, ideally I'd add something like leucine. I'd add digestive enzymes. I might add like a stable spore-based probiotic, and then you can start getting to equivalent benefits potentially of whey.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time. We're already getting a little bit, I think it's like an hour and a half. But I have one last topic with protein I want to talk about. And that is, we already kind of talked about it, but BCAAs versus EAAs, and actually just in general, consuming BCAAs as a drink, intra-workout, it's kind of the whole, anabolic window type thing, going back to that and talking about, like, is it actually beneficial to consume BCAAs during, throughout the day as a drink supplement, and then potentially kind of talk about the differences between consuming, if you were to consume a BCAA drink, would it be more beneficial to consume EAAs over BCAAs, or is there...
Yeah, that data is very convoluted, and there will be a big fight, like even in the ISSN about that, about the EAAs versus BCAAs versus leucine. There's definitely some people that argue EAAs. I think it's there's so much, the data is all over the place on, like, some of it looks at whole body protein synthesis versus muscle protein synthesis, which is two totally different things, and you can't extrapolate that data like from whole body protein synthesis to muscle protein synthesis necessarily. And then there's kind of the refractory nature of leucine, that, like, you can't just take leucine all day long and be anabolic all day long. There's this refractory effect, like, where you can only spike it so often and get benefit. So I think EAAs are super expensive and don't taste that great, and I just don't see the value versus BCAAs or leucine. I think BCAAs or leucine are fine. I think spiking your meal with leucine can make sense in a pill. Like, you can just take one capsule leucine or HMB or something like that. BCAAs could work if you're cutting. That's, again, I think the time that it might make sense is when you're on a deep cut and maybe calories matter and you don't want to eat as much protein. You're getting enough protein to be anabolic, but you don't want to keep adding to calories. And, the cut is all the difference. So BCAA is cool. The other time, and when you say cutting, sense, just cutting fat.
Like on a diet, or you're trying to cut body fat. Just to, if someone is listening, they don't understand what that is.
So furthering that would be like if you're on a deep fast and your fast goal isn't
autophagy,
kind of autophagy, detox, etc. But your fast goal is to lose fat faster,
being in a
caloric deficit. Yeah, exactly. Then BCAAs would make sense, again, maybe on a fast, and you may maintain more lean body mass. I mean, BHB, beta hydroxybutyrate, from elevated ketones has been shown to be anti-catabolic, but the BCAAs could augment that, because at some point you're just in a deep enough caloric deficit where no matter, like you're actually going to start using some muscle mass. So, you know, I know like Dom D'Agostino, like on his extended fast would use things like MCTs and BCAAs to stay more anabolic, anti-catabolic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, what are your goals? Like, yeah, maybe if you're a power lifter, like someone like Dom, and you're, you know, on an extended fast, then those things might make sense. But if, you know, that's so few people. I think BCAAs, honestly, I just use them as like a flavored drink sometimes in place of having, you know, a soft drink. And I know it's, you know, decent for me, and I'm really losing nothing, and there's not much caloric, you know, impact to it. So, but no, I don't think you need to have it like, you know, during every workout and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, everything you just said is literally exactly the 3 things that I tell. Like, because I've had, actually in the last few months, I've had a bunch of clients ask me, like, should I be drinking BCAAs? Like, things like, I'm sure you get that question a lot. And I tell, that's the 3 things I say. Like, I personally think just exactly what you said. If you are in a calorie deficit, potentially they can be beneficial. If you're cutting hard, like you said, if you're fasting and you're still trying to be as anabolic as possible, they can potentially be beneficial. And if you just like the way they taste, like literally those are the exact 3 things. We have the same mind. Actually, I mean, we don't, because yours is way more advanced than mine.
No. But, we're on it. We're on it.
Yeah. But I would say, like, when people are, I think it's also thinking about like the big picture things versus, or like I say this all the time, a lot of people are starting, like if they're starting to major in the minor, then that's where we have to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, if you're eating adequate protein, that is the most important thing from high quality, good sources, whole foods, things like that in their whole form. Because just what you said in the beginning of this, like if we start breaking down everything into like their isolates and all these super
true.
forms,
we could do
like,
a whole show on your majoring in the minor. Like that really gets like into like sympathetic nervous system states, like where you're trying to be anabolic and you're trying to grow mentally, but you're literally putting yourself in a fight or flight state where you're creating like fear around the things that are supposed to be positive stimuli. And it's a whole like downward spiral physiologically, mentally. Like, yeah, that's a bad place to be if like people get caught up in that. And there's certainly, you know, people that if you listen to the talking heads around you, then you can get caught up in all those details too. And most of it comes from marketing and or ignorance / fear. Like, so those can be nasty.
Agreed. Well, that was a lot of good info. I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover in terms of protein. Oh, wait. Last thing. Last thing. Okay. So this is something, as we're kind of on the topic of cutting and losing body fat and things like that, why I want to just kind of drive home the point of protein as the most thermic effect of food. Can we talk a little bit, like just to end, can we chat a little bit about why, like what that even means? Like what is the thermic effect of food, and why is protein have the most thermic effect of food versus carbs and fats, and why your body basically takes more energy to break down protein versus carbs and fats, and kind of just rounding out the protein.
It's pretty simple in that I always like to say that the idea of like you are what you eat is silly, and you burn what you eat. So if you eat carbs highly, you become very efficient at breaking down carbs and using them for fuel. If you eat a lot of fat, a la keto, you become very efficient at converting those fats into free fatty acids for fuel and ketones. If you eat a lot of protein, which is the bodybuilder clean diet, clean, which means low carb, low fat, which is nonsense, where like 95% of your like food is or calories are coming from protein, then you get quote unquote efficient at gluconeogenesis, which is not efficient. And that's where you're converting protein to glucose for fuel. And so there's work to be done there. And to me, that's also why, like when I used to do the clean bodybuilder diet, why I also felt like shit all the time is because one, I wasn't efficient at either using carbs or using ketones quickly and readily for fuel. I was trying to oxidize protein and convert it to glucose. But also I think you get in this zone where you have like high protein, where your blood sugar changes. And this is theoretical to me, but I found to be true, is that your blood sugar elevation and declination, like you can have hypoglycemia essentially when you just drop 10 points, maybe in your blood sugar. And I think that's like a lot of that, like mood issues. And then there's certainly maybe carbs are having an effect on serotonin too, like, and not having enough carbs. And I think you just become very inefficient at, like, it can work to your favor, to your point of the thermic effect of food. But if you're only eating protein, it can end up being a nightmare. Yeah. That's what I've largely experienced for the reasons that I'm saying. It's just like someone who has a 600 blood sugar can have hypoglycemia going from 600 to 300. Mm-hmm. And like, like that's why, like when you're working clinically, like you don't just look at like what their blood sugar is, you need to know what their baseline is. Because, you might look at someone with 300 and give them glucagon to bring them down, but you might put them into a coma because they were at 600 and they were actually having hypoglycemic episode. Mm-hmm. So kind of a complicated answer, but that would be my answer of like why you shouldn't eat 100% protein, but also like the thermic effect of food. Yes, like protein is just harder to convert for your body, and that can work to your favor in terms of burning calories.
Yeah. So you need a good amount of protein, and you need a good amount of protein from sources that have a full amino acid profile, specifically leucine and the other essential amino acids. But you don't want to be eating 100% protein, which I don't even know what that looks like. But I mean, I guess like egg whites and whey protein powder.
And chicken breasts and
chicken
blah,
breasts.
blah, blah, and fish.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But getting enough is important. And that's actually something, and we're going to wrap up here, but just one thing is, just from my experience with working one-on-one with clients over the past few years, especially women, is that I've not had one woman come to me who is eating enough protein in my perspective. Mm-hmm. And once we bump their protein up, not everything, but a lot of things start to happen. So I think that if you are
Agreed.
Someone out there, if you're struggling with something, or especially if you're someone who's, following maybe a really strict ketogenic diet, or standard ketogenic diet, you're not getting enough protein, that could be something that you need to look at. If you're trying to build muscle, if you're trying to lose body fat, and
if you're not getting enough protein, then you don't have enough skeletal muscle mass. And that is the great equalizer on the ketogenic diet in terms of carb tolerance and protein tolerance with gluconeogenesis. In terms of, like, because I have more muscle mass and because I'm more active, I can have more carbs and more protein and not have it affect my ketones as much as, like, women, like, they'll say, I have to be so strict. I can only have 20 grams. Like, I can't even have 20 grams. I can't have this. It's because of, like, literally the great factor is muscle mass. Mm-hmm. And how active you are with that muscle mass. And that's why you'll see, like, I've had bodybuilder friends that can have over 100 grams of carbs a day and still be in ketosis.
Yeah. Yep.
And, I can have like probably 50, 60, 70 grams. And I can have some large protein boluses and not have it affect me. Mm-hmm. But that's why, like, women, like you're saying, especially women that don't have much muscle mass, that are more sedentary, that aren't eating enough protein, why they have such difficulties with the ketogenic diet.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. Well, that was fun.
Yes.
So we are definitely probably gonna have another one. What do we talk? Metabolic flexibility. That's the next topic, which is wait, that's the name of the podcast. uh, Sweet. All right. Well, do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you one more time?
Yes.
On social, website, all that stuff?
Yep. ShawnWells.com, at Ingredientologist on Instagram. And I'll have a book coming out at the end of the year called The Energy Formula. And you can find me as a regular contributor on Metflex and Chill. It's where I am every other week.
Yep.
So get used to me, people.
Yeah, get used to it. You're going to be my co-host soon. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Shawn. And I will see you next time for part 3.
All right. Thanks, Rachel.
All right. Bye.
Bye.